When we look at the world today, particularly from this literature perspective, it's really high time that we should just stop paying attention to the complication of the politics, but instead we should really focus on another critical aspect of a world, which is culture. And how does culture play in our society today when we understand the human relations? And what about children's book? I mean, again, this is not the first time that we discuss how children's books are actually transforming or even changing lives beyond children, even for adults. But also at the same time, one thing we have to realize that children's books can really bring a lot of meaningful and engaging conversations, especially we talk about culture and also the human relationships. Well, that's what we are doing here today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, and who is Frances Cha. Frances Cha is a Korean novelist and living in New York, and she was born in the United States. She moved to Hong Kong at the age of 8 and to South Korea at the age of 11. Again, she's a well-known author, and if you're familiar with her work, that her children's book include The Goblin Twins. I think it was published last September, and the sequel will be published this September. And she currently teaches fiction in the MFA program at the Columbia University. Well, Frances, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, such a pleasure to speak to you, Frances. Now, let's get to the question right away. I mean, again, as I mentioned in the intro, when we look at the intricacy and the complication of the modern society today, everyone seems to be very much interested in talking about politics and, of course, the economic agenda, and also we're looking at this social movement, etc. But you actually came out with this book called The Goblin Twins, and bring the viewers and also the readers another perspective about the different culture, and particularly talk about this Korean culture. Help us with better understanding what is the inspiration behind this book, and why do you think it's so critical for the younger generations to understand the context within the book?
Thank you for the question. So we were just discussing before we started recording how we both have children. And I think having grown up in several different cultures, there is hardly a year, I think, when I wasn't moving or wasn't kind of going back and forth between countries. And if you grow up that way, constantly looking at the differences in cultures, because the minute you step into a different place, you're unconsciously making comparisons and thinking about what's different, but at the same time, what is also universal, and thinking about that even as a child. And currently, my children go to school in America. They also go to school in Korea in the summers, but in the States, there is not as many books that are representing Asian culture that is, I don't know how to quite put this in a way, but I was looking at books that they were reading, and a lot of them were from, books that I had read as a child, and a lot of them don't age well, actually, decades later, because of course we've gotten more progressive in terms of what is, hurtful to cultures or hurtful to identities, and what kind of misogynistic or racist ideas have been ingrained in these older books that were, not intentional on the writer's part, but it can't help popping out at us when we read them in a contemporary setting with a contemporary understanding. And so my kind of idea was to write a new type of book where showing a cross-cultural movement, bringing in some folklore, but also what was very important to me was showing an Asian perspective that is very funny and kind of silly, but also brings a different understanding of the culture that children unfamiliar with this folklore of tokebi, which are mythical creatures of Korean history, would be um, would be learning something and that they find hopefully interesting, and then putting a very funny twist on top of it. So a lot was going through my mind, and when I was writing this, and it is about perspective because these two creatures from Korean folklore that are hundreds of years old moved to New York. And I'm trying to offer a perspective that is different from, say, what American children would think of New York and what an international, from a big city in Asia would kind of think of the same perspective. So just to show children there are many different types of perspectives in the world, many types of backgrounds, and even mythical creatures. When I do school visits, I love to start with, what is a mythical creature that you guys love and know? And we go through like unicorns, fairies, or dragons, and then talking about how in different cultures we have different creatures that you may not be familiar with. So just offering different perspectives.
Francis, that one thing that stood out to me, again, go along with what you just shared with us. It's one of the important and one of the key concepts that we're actually trying to teach children today. I mean, again, as you mentioned before taping the show, you and I, we had a conversation and talking about, the children's upbringing and also the world that they're exposed to. The concept called cross-cultural study. I mean, again, this is not something new in the year of 2024. And I believe that back in the days, I mean, you're a teacher in Columbia University, one of the renowned and well-known institutions in the States and the world. But I remember when I was in school that we were also talking about the cross-cultural communication or the cross-cultural study. Let's go back to this concept, Francis. What is the definition, or what is the, I guess the word is, interpretation in your book that when we talk about cross-cultural communication, I mean, you talk about that you actually traveled and, you live from different countries and different cities. But how does your book translate, or how does your book reveal cross-cultural subjects or cross-cultural content throughout the content? What do you say to that?
Well, yeah. So the original one is constantly trying to show children what they think is very normal and universal is actually not normal and universal if you're coming from a different perspective. So at the granular level in this story, it's actually about, first of all, bringing in mythical creatures, as I was just speaking about, that they're not familiar with, educating them surreptitiously through humor about what is normal about these mythical creatures in a different culture. So constant jokes where both serving to be funny, but at the same time bringing information. So one line is, Tolkien gave you we're only 601 years old. That means with that, I'm trying to show actually typical Tokebi are thousands of years old, and they're being 601 makes them very big, very silly and young, and bringing in to them pranking is very normal, and playing tricks is normal. And so they've heard about this concept called Halloween in a foreign, strange land where people love to dress up in scary costumes and trick people. And the fact that they haven't heard of this concept before, which is such a big part of Western culture now, and it's ingrained, and it's especially in American culture where Halloween is actually the biggest celebration day of the year. I've heard sometimes it overpasses Christmas. I'm not quite sure how accurate it is, but it is such a huge celebration. And the fact that someone who may not have heard of this at all is bringing another perspective into their, small minds. Oh, things are really different in other parts of the world. But at the same time, if they were to come here, they would really love this concept,
Mm.
and vice versa, kind of accepting, oh, maybe if I go there, I would also really love that concept, and showing. There's a scene in my book where we have from their past, the Tokebi are scaring a crown prince in the
Mm.
royal palace, and I'm also showing kind of the different setting of a royal palace. It looks
Mm.
very different, quite different furniture from the Western palaces of Disney princesses that they are used to, or even just the concept of a European palace and the furniture. And I always kind of, when I give school visits and presentations, I'm bringing in another layer of information. Oh, in this palace, we actually have many mythical creatures that are adorning the palace, supposed to protect and give good luck, as well as this crown prince. He's leaping into the arms of what looks like his mother, but maybe it's his wife because back in the day they married, much older than they were. So he might be six, married to a 15-year-old.
Mm.
And again, kind of providing a little subtle cultural historical information behind, the backdrop of this actual story taking place.
Francis, as you were speaking and I was looking at your book again, I have to say, as a father myself, it not only that it's engaging for children to dive into the concept, but also, I mean, again, as adult, we also enjoy that reading books with good twists, even children's books, because we all had that moment that before turning the next page, and then we have this, wow, I did not see that coming moment, and that was the big surprise. But let's stay with me. Let's talk about a little bit more. I want to talk about the lines and the dialogues in this book. I mean, again, I was, first of all, when I received the advanced copy of the book and I was reading it to myself, and then I was able to share it with my daughter, and then I was reading to her, and something dawned on me that is so conversational. I mean, again, when we think about the content, when we think about this dialogue, it's so conversational. Again, it's just like the everyday language that we're using with kids or even we hear among the children. For example, two characters they were talking, oh, why don't you go make some friends? Are you bored? You mean again, so I want to know why, like it's why might not be the right word, but what is the purpose that make the lines or make the dialogues and so conversational and so personal? What was the motivation behind that? I mean, is it only for because it's children's book, or you really want to build this what we called literature engagement or literature a bridge with children, or even not just between adults and kids, but also among the kids, they can have simple dialogues about what they just read from your book. I want to hear from you.
No, thank you so much. First of all, I really appreciate you reading the advanced copy. That's from the second book coming out in September. And I think it is a lot about what children can identify with, as well as adults too, because
Mm,
it honestly, that kind of dialogue, oh, I'm trying to do something and then someone else is trying to get my attention.
mm,
The child is trying to get my attention, and you have to make a choice. Everyone has to make a choice of,
mm,
do I reject this call for my attention and call for my time, or do I engage?
mm,
And sometimes it is really the last thing you want to do in that moment because you're intent on something else. And in that particular relationship, I did want to show how, both sides of this choice that's being made, but at the same time, what making a choice to engage looks like.
mm,
And if you love somebody, then that choice and that sacrifice of giving up what you want to do, in this case, it's Tokyo loves to read. He just wants to read. And
mm,
Kibi desperately, trying to get his attention to do something else. And that sacrifice doesn't actually feel like sacrifice if you do it for somebody that you love. And hopefully that's a universal theme.
Mm.
Certainly true for parents who I feel like in this very, very busy modern age where parents have to be doing everything.
Mm.
And I certainly feel like I'm always failing at everything. But when my child comes and is asking me to do something and I'm still failing at whatever it is that I was supposed to be doing, and I make that choice to engage, I do know that it's just so absolutely the most important thing for my life, very selfishly my life, and of course it will have an impact on their life. And even on a sibling level, I used to do that with my younger sibling, who's a boy, uh, a father himself now. But
Mm.
and when I look at my daughters, my older daughter, all she wants to do is read. But the younger one is always saying, "Onni, Onni, come, come, help me with this," or "I have to show you this." And I
Mm.
can see her kind of take a big sigh, and you know, she does make a sacrifice at the moment, and then she does engage. And as a result, they have this very wonderful relationship. And trying to talk about that kind of sacrifice versus reward um, type of universal rapport.
Of course, Francis. I mean, again, as we continue to explore the world, and we're seeing, again, as we mentioned before, the complication of the world today, sacrifice has always been one of the most difficult topics and concept to teach, especially to children. I mean, again, it's not about the intricacy or the complexity of a concept. It's really how can we put actions behind our words when we talk about sacrifice, and what does that mean to build up this sacrificial spirit or even motivation. Now let's talk about the illustration of that book. Again, we know that a good children's book is not just about the words, it's also about the images. I mean, I always tell my friends around me and also my family members that being a journalist, that made me to become more visual. So I would say I'm a visual person. I learn things by feeling them, by touching them, by seeing them. And when I was reading your book, not only the words and the text, but also the images that you put or you chose in the book. So let's talk about that, Francis. How do the images or how do the illustrations that echo exactly what you're trying to say throughout the stories? I mean, again, there are mythical creatures and there are real life struggles and conversational friendship or dialogues and personal relationship. Put everything together. How does the illustration come about, and what are the secret ingredients for you to know exactly what picture do I want it for children to be more seem more personal or even more appealing to the readers? Your thoughts?
When we were looking at illustrators for the book, that was such an important choice. And my editor, Phoebe Ye, she has done the Magic School Bus books. I'm not sure
Mm,
if you're familiar with them, but they
sure.
were such a big part of my childhood growing up. And there is such an incredible relationship between the text and the visuals in that series. So I knew I was in very good hands. But when we were picking an illustrator, it was very important to me that the illustrator would have an understanding of the culture going into the story so that I'm not having to explain every single detail, and he or she would bring their own cultural understanding to it. So there was a running list of Korean illustrators, a very short list, who could do humor, um, cultural, deliver the cute multi layers that we wanted to pursue in this book. and at the same time be cross-cultural herself.
Mm.
So Jamie, who very, very kindly said yes, and she was such a dream get, Jamie Kim, she has a history of illustrating these incredible stories that brings all the elements that I just talked about. But for the Tokebi, I was so curious what she would bring to this idea.
Mm.
And sure enough, she made them very visually different to look at, so it's very clear which twin we're talking about.
Mm.
The details down to the eyebrows. One is very clearly the mischievous trickster, prankster,
Mm.
which is, and one is kind of the soft, book loving, introverted, definitely a kindlier self. So, and in the beginning, they looked more childlike
Mm.
because if you look at the history of Tokebi in Korean folklore, the range of depictions is vast. Some look more human, some look extremely much like monsters. So we went back and forth between iterations, and every round we were always trying to make it more funny. I would say the funny was the biggest focus because, as you know from reading to kids, it's just another layer
Mm.
of intense joy when they're laughing and we're and what you were saying about the adult level too, my favorite books when I'm reading to my children are, of course, the ones that have that subtle, separate layer of humor for
Right.
adults when there's an inside joke, just gearing towards adults at the same time as the children's humor. So, with the second book, too, I really tried to play that up as much as I could. What is the scariest thing to a New Yorker? Oh my gosh, traffic stickers on every car every time.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
trying to bring that in alongside the more like pure young humor for children as well.
Mm.
And
Well,
Jamie
friends,
was incredible
sure.
with that.
Well, Francis, again, this is one exciting and meaningful book, not only for adults, but again, very much dedicated to children. I want to wrap up our conversation by going back to this book. It's called The Goblin Twins, Too Hard and Too Scared. Now, let's just say, Francis, for anyone that who's not familiar with the Korean culture and with this whole what we called cross-cultural bridge, cross-cultural dialogue, what would you expect the readers to understand when they finish reading the last chapter of your book or even the last page of this book with their children? I mean, even just for adults. Again, as we mentioned before, this book, there are layers for audience across the spectrum, across the ages. So, what are your expectations for them, and what do you hope them to appreciate or even to understand from this book? I want to hear your final thoughts.
Thank you. I think this is essentially an immigrant story in a way, but I feel like as adults, um, especially in this era of global conflict, these cross-cultural movements are really scary
Mm.
in the scheme of the conflicts that are going on.
Mm.
But I also want to show to children if we encounter a perspective from a country that is not our own, there are still just wonderful things to learn, wonderful perspectives. With the humor, we can connect on a universal level.
Mm.
And I hope that's kind of the deeper takeaway that can occur. And alongside all the other small, funny storylines in the book.
Well, again, Francis, as you mentioned before, humor, it's something that readers ought to appreciate as well. I mean, regardless how old you are, and regardless how old we're going to be, But at the end of the day in life, that we do need laughters in literature, and also we do need to spend more time and quality time with children to appreciate the good books so that we can treasure and value those moments altogether. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak to Frances Cha. Again, Frances is a Korean novelist and she lives in New York. She was born in the United States. She moved to Hong Kong at the age of 8 and to South Korea at the age of 11. Again, her publications is being translated into 12 languages, and I strongly encourage everyone go online to check out her new book. It's called The Goblin Twins. Again, it's an amazing read, not only for adults, but also for children, and the sequel will be published this September. Well, Frances, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and again, we really appreciate that you dedicate such a meaningful project and put into practice that we're able to appreciate that how this book teaches us about cross-cultural communication and also really bring children back to the world where they actually belong when we talk about the value of reading today. So thank you so much for your time. And again, let's keep in touch and love to have you back on the show for our future episodes.